Think of the soybean market as a giant game of musical chairs. The US and Brazil are the players with the biggest seats, and China's the music lover needing a place to sit. For a while, China played fair, splitting their time between buying US and Brazilian soybeans. It kept the music playing and everyone content. But then bam! The Trump administration changed the melody with tariffs. Imagine someone cranking up the volume on a song you hate. China, understandably annoyed, stormed off and cozied up to Brazil. Now this isn't some simple chair swap. We're talking about a global dance party. You can't just switch partners mid-song, you need to adjust the whole routine. Suddenly shipping routes that were running smoothly for years get rerouted as China signs long-term deals with Brazil tea. This leaves US soybean farmers scrambling for new buyers while we try to redirect our shipments. Imagine the chaos when the music suddenly changes and everyone's bumping into each other. It's going to take a while and probably some missteps to get the flow right again. Now this ain't like flipping on a light switch. We're talking ships, ports, truckers, the whole 9 yards. You gotta rewire the entire system. China signs long-term contracts with Brazil. US soybean farmers are left scrambling, and we start shipping our beans all the way to Europe instead. It's a logistical nightmare, like shattering a vase and trying to glue it back together. This guy I was talking to, a bigwig in the whole supply chain world, says it took 30 years to build this global system of trade. We busted it in 3, and rebuilding will take a decade or more. The whole thing was built on getting the lowest prices, the Walmart model, right? But by cutting suppliers, squeezing every penny, we also made the system way more fragile. Think about it. Something small goes wrong. A strike, a port backlog, a truck shortage, and bam! Everything grinds to a halt. Now it's not hopeless. We'll rebuild, but things are going to change. It won't just be about price anymore. We'll have like trading clubs, the US, Europe-friendly countries, and China will have its own thing going on. China's cool with that they're moving away from us anyway. This means, yeah, prices might go up a bit, but think of that extra cost as insurance. You pay for house insurance hoping it won't burn down, right? Same idea. More reliable even if it costs more. National security matters here too, with Russia, Ukraine, and China in the mix. And about inflation, yeah, it sucks, but the supply chain mess is a big reason why. This type of inflation isn't about people spending like crazy, it's about real shortages. When that eases up, so will prices, probably tipping things into a whole new problem, deflation. The Fed will be fumbling as usual, but that's a story for another day. Trade wars aren't just political squabbles. They're like earthquakes that ripple through entire industries. Remember the tech component shortages during the 2020s? That mess started with trade tensions between the US and China. Suddenly, the smooth flow of those vital computer chips got disrupted, and everything from car manufacturing to smartphone production got hit with delays. The problem is, once you shake up the system, it doesn't settle overnight. Companies who depend on those parts had to find new suppliers at a moment's notice, sometimes paying much higher prices. Worse yet, some companies had to redesign their entire products to source from somewhere new. It's like your favorite restaurant suddenly changing its menu because they can't get their normal ingredients anymore. You might adjust and find something else, but it's a hassle, and the experience isn't the same. For decades, companies were obsessed with one thing: squeezing costs for the cheapest price no matter what. It's like that extreme couponer who's willing to drive across town for a deal even if it wastes gas and time. Businesses chase the lowest cost suppliers around the world, building long, complicated supply chains focused solely on the bottom line. But what happens when that super cheap supplier gets hit by a lockdown like the ones we saw in China in 2023, or when war breaks out like in Ukraine? Suddenly that bargain isn't so cheap anymore. Companies learned the hard way that focusing only on price made them incredibly vulnerable. It's like building a house of cards. Looks impressive, but one gust of wind and it collapses. Now businesses are realizing they need to build sturdier supply chains, even if it means slightly higher costs. Think of moving from that flimsy card house to a solid brick one. It costs more up front, but it'll weather a storm. The days of global free for all trade are fading fast. Think of it like your neighborhood changing. Maybe for years, everyone had open lawns and kids played with whoever, but then some new families move in, put up fences, and suddenly things feel more divided. The world of trade is becoming similar. We're seeing groups form based on shared values and security concerns. It'll be the US, Europe, and some friendly Asian nations in one group, with China in its own sphere of influence. This means some of those rock-bottom prices we got used to might become a thing of the past. It's like your favorite grocery store suddenly raising prices because they're sourcing from local farms instead of cheaper overseas suppliers. It's a trade-off, a bit more expensive, but you know where it comes from and it feels more reliable. Same goes for countries. We might pay a bit more for goods, but we can ensure they're not made in countries that pose national security risks or by suppliers that could vanish with the next overseas crisis. When we hear inflation, a lot of us get flashbacks to those crazy gas lines and wild interest rates of the 1970s. But today's inflation is a different beast. Think of it more like a bad supply chain reaction than a runaway train. We're not in a situation where everyone's spending money like crazy. It's about things we need simply not being available. Picture a grocery store with empty shelves. Pandemic lockdowns messed up factories. Remember China's big shutdowns in 2023. Then there's the war in Ukraine disrupting grain and fertilizer supplies. Combine that with energy price shocks, and it's like a recipe for crazy price spikes. This kind of inflation eventually fixes itself, but in a painful way. It's like if everyone at a party wants pizza, but only one slice is left, that slice gets super expensive. Eventually, people get tired of the high price, go home hungry, and demand collapses, bringing prices down with it. Unfortunately, that also means a recession is likely not far behind.